Alright guys, it's that time again. It's time for the meta report. This took me, like always, too long. It's pretty annoying, that's why I only try and do like 2 of these per month, generally at the most. But I would really appreciate any likes, any comments. It would go a long way since I hate doing these, but I know there's a lot of people that like them, so, you know, if you could just like or comment, I would appreciate it. Subscribe would be even better. But all the statistics are from Limitless. I've just compiled them together and I've color-coded them just to make the matchups a lot more easily expressible about how good or bad the matchup is. The darker the green, the better the matchup, and then it kind of just scales to like a light orange, dark orange, red if the matchup's really bad. And I'm just gonna say this at the beginning because people will ask me why the mirror match squares aren't 50%. I just decided to put the deck's overall win rate in those squares. Those are the squares running right down you know, the middle diagonally. And yeah, this is the deck's overall win rate because we all know that the mirror matches are going to be 50-50, right? If all things are equal, like they're the exact same deck list, right? So the clear winner here is Dialga Arceus. Now, a little caveat I want to get out of the way immediately is we have a very small sample size for a lot of games, and if you notice, compared to the last meta report, this one has a lot of 50% squares, and that's because it just so happens, like, let's say there's 20 games between that matchup. It's actually a 10 and 10 split. Now, over time, when we get more and more data for certain matchups, a lot of these numbers are going to change drastically, and basically all of these 50% will go away. There's even a couple of 100% because the matchups data is so small, so limited. Same thing with, there's even a couple of 0%, I think. But yeah, I just wanted to get that out of the way really quick. But the highest win rate by far on this entire chart is Dialga Arceus at almost 58% win rate, which is absolutely insane. And Darkrai Magnezone is barely over 51. Leafeon Celebi is barely over 50. Articuno is also insanely high at 56.49, so almost 56.5, which is also an insane win rate. And then everything else is basically even, Lucario Rampardos is basically at 56%, which is also really high. And then Solo Palkia is a deck I decided to showcase because it also has a really high win rate above 56%. So strangely, the Solo Palkia deck, the Solo Articuno deck are doing extremely well, and Arceus Dialga followed by Rampardos, Lucario are doing very well as well. So those are like the 4 best decks as far as win rate goes right now, which is really interesting. So Dialga is finally not worthless garbage, which is nice. I'm assuming that over the course of the meta, things are obviously going to get more refined. These percentages are going to change drastically, and generally solo decks do pretty well at the beginning of a format, and then they kind of fall off. But this format might be the exception due to Irida, because Articuno and Palkia are both mega buffed by the fact that they basically have like an Erica now. So we'll see if they continue to fall off or not. Greninja Darkrai is doing far less as good compared to last meta because Darkrai Magnezone is also doing less good. So, you know, the deck that it's trying to punish is just not really worth punishing. I mean, it has barely over a 51% win rate. It's not too crazy. The Executor Celebi and Leafeon Celebi decks are pretty similar. They have almost the same win rate. One's 48.55, the other one's 50.8. So they're really not far apart from each other. The matchup spreads are almost identical. If you take a look at the Pachirisu, Greninja, Darkrai, and Palkia matchup, all those squares are exactly the same. Dark green, red. It's basically just play whichever one you feel like playing. There's almost no difference, really. The Leafeon Celebi seems to have a much better matchup into Arceus Dialga, but it's still super losing for both decks. But yeah, we'll just get into all the specifics here. So Arceus Dialga is winning into Darkrai Magnezone at almost 58%, crushes Executor Celebi at 75%, crushes Leafeon Celebi at 62%, slightly winning against Charizard at 52%, slightly winning against Articuno at 53%. Almost even with Arceus Crobat, but slightly winning. Almost even with Palkia Vaporeon, but slightly winning. Loses pretty badly to Lucario Rampardos at 39%, almost 40%. Crushes Pachirisu at 67%. Slightly, well, more than slightly winning. Actually, he's crushing Greninja Darkrai. Crushes Magnezone Skarmory very badly at almost 69%, and crushes Solo Palkia. So, by far and away the best matchup spread, which is what you're going to see when the win rate's also the highest at 57.97, so no surprise there. Darkrai Magnezone, like we just said, losing very badly to Arceus Dialga. Even matchup against Executor. Like I said, as soon as we get more data on this matchup, it's not going to stay 50-50, but it'll still probably be pretty close either way. Basically even into Leafeon. Crushes Charizard at 61%, loses to Solo Articuno at 47%, loses to Arceus Crobat at 36%, beats Palkia Vaporeon at 60%, slightly loses to Lucario Rampardos at 48.98. It's basically an even matchup. As soon as you get a little bit more data, it's probably going to even out. And then loses to Pachirisu at 47.27, which is interesting. You'd think the deck would actually beat Pachirisu, but it's not. Probably just because there's probably games where you start with Darkrai, you don't have Leaf, and then there's games where you just can't assemble the Magnezone, and those are the games you probably lose more often than not. But like, we still need some more data, right? Magnezone Darkrai is crushing Greninja Darkrai at the moment at 31%, which is really weird because Darkrai Greninja was picking on Darkrai Magnezone really badly last format. So, could just be a low amount of games throwing that off as well. Beats Magnezone Skarmory at 64% and loses horribly to Solo Palkia, which is interesting at 33%. Executor Celebi loses very badly into Dialga Arceus at 22%. Almost even with Darkrai Magnezone at 48.92%. Basically even into Executor at 48%. Slightly worse into the Leafeon variant at 46.84%. Getting crushed by Charizard at 30%. Loses to Solo Articuno at 42%. And I'm assuming that's because the Articuno has the cheese potential with Misty. And then also what helped you out in the grass matchups before is that you could heal and then just win the race even if you got some bad coin flips with Executor. The problem is now Water has Irida, so though you're just both healing back and forth while Articuno is consistently swinging for 80, which I would imagine why it's favored by almost 8% here. Executor Celebi is beating Arceus Crobat at 56%, slightly losing to Palkia Vaporeon at 45%. Does really well against Lucario Rampardos at 58%. Grass is still hosing Electric at 77%. Crushes Greninja Darkrai at 71%. Loses to Magnezone Skarmory at 43% and gets obliterated by Palkia. I'm assuming it's the same reason as Articuno, just Palkia also has the potential to just one-shot Celebi, which Articuno doesn't have, so it makes sense that it would be even worse there. Leafeon Celebi into Dialga Arceus is 37%, so very losing. Loses to Darkrai Magnezone, slightly favored into Executor Celebi, but again, that's probably going to just get closer and closer to 50%. And then we have losing, but not horribly, into Charizard at 43, which is not bad when you have a type advantage and you're not losing, it's not even a 10% margin difference, right? And then we have losing to Articuno again, 46%, winning against Arceus Crobat at 55%, losing to Palkia Vaporeon very badly at 24%, and again, Palkia just being able to one-shot both Pokemon, they have to have capes to survive, is and untouched before that, so it makes a lot of sense to me. Losing to Lucario Rampardos at 46%, crushing again Pachirisu and Greninja Darkrai because again Grass does well against chip damage, does well against Electric, and then we're also beating Skarmory and Magnezone at 58%, and we are getting destroyed by Palkia once again. All right, moving on to Charizard. Charizard is slightly losing into Dialga Arceus at 46.99. Gets destroyed by Darkrai Magnezone. It's kind of hard for Charizard to beat single point decks that are good because it's really hard to set up that many Crimson Storms. Also, Moltres gets obliterated by Magnezone. If you ping the Moltres twice with a Darkrai and then Magnezone, it's, you know, it's pretty easy. Crushes the grass decks, obviously, 70%. Doesn't do as well against Leafeon Celebi, only at 56%. I'm not exactly sure why it would be almost a 14% difference. Seems interesting. And then maybe it's because when Leafeon gets set up, you don't have to rely on good coin flips. You can just go 70-70 into Moltres. That probably has something to do with it. And then Charizard and Articuno, obviously Charizard's losing at 39%. I think the Articuno is probably just too consistent. You know, Charizard stumbles on itself, you know, it just happens. 50% win rate against Arceus Crobat. Again, with more data, this isn't going to stay 50%. Slightly winning into Palkia Vaporeon. Charizard is getting absolutely obliterated by Lucario Rampardos, and I think that has a lot to do with Sudowoodo, because if you start Sudowoodo, you can just start just wrecking Moltres right out the gate. So I think that's, you know, definitely something to do with it. Also, again, it's another single point deck. It's hard for Charizard to get that many Crimson Storms. And then we've got losing into Pachirisu. Again, if they stumble, Pachirisu is just going to obliterate Moltres, right? Losing into Greninja Darkrai, and that's a losing matchup Charizard's had for a long time. It's just too easy to, you know, whittle down the Zard in the back. They run Cyrus. You know, there's just really nowhere safe to go, and you can make them fight 2 single point Mons before they get to your Darkrai. And again, it's hard for Charizard to get through all that. Charizard does a lot better against basically all EX decks than, you know, a mix, or even worse, all single point decks. Charizard is losing into Magnezone Skarmory at 38.46%, and it's slightly favored into Palkia at 53%. All right, moving on to Articuno. Articuno is slightly losing to Dialga Arceus at 46%, basically even into Darkrai Magnezone at 50%. Is actually beating Executor Celebi at 56% for the reasons mentioned earlier. It's not beating Leafeon quite as well, just a few percentage points off at 51%. It is beating Charizard, as we just stated, at 60%. It's destroying Arceus Crobat at 65%. Does well against Palkia Vaporeon at 62%. But really close to even against Lucario Rampardos at 51%. Gets destroyed by Pachirisu. Makes sense at 25%. It is beating Darkrai Greninja at 68.18%. It is beating Magnezone Skarmory 55.56%. And it is crushing Palkia at 75%, which is, well, it's actually kind of surprising, I guess, because it just needs less to get on at 75%. So makes sense. All right, and here's a deck that everyone was pretty curious to see how it would turn out. The Arceus Crobat. I never really believed in this deck, and as of right now, it's, you know, it's not performing well at all. I mean, it's 50.34%, but there's a lot better things to be playing. So losing into Arceus Dialga, winning pretty heavily against Darkrai Zone, which that's a good reason to play it at 59%. Loses really badly, almost evenly into Executor and Leafeon at 41 and 42% losing. Another even matchup that's not really even. Then we are losing into Articuno. Makes sense, they're probably just getting enabled too quickly now. The Irida's helping the ping damage from the Crobat and such. We are losing into Palkia Vaporeon. They might just be getting set up too fast. Losing into Lucario Rampardos at 41% again. Very favored into Pachirisu at 60%, which is nice. Loses terribly to Greninja Darkrai at 25%. Has no wins against Magnezone Skarmory, but again, that's a data issue. And then another not even matchup, but it's even for now because the data points are low, into Palkia. So, I mean, it's really not that bad. It's just there's a lot of other decks that are just performing better at the moment. Palkia Vaporeon is losing slightly at 48% into Arceus Dialga. It is losing pretty badly into Darkrai Magnezone at 40%. It's beating Executor Celebi at 55%, but it really beats Leafeon at 75.68%. So you'll see that a lot of these grass matchups are so very close across the board. It's almost just whatever flavor you're going for, right? Loses into Charizard at 48%. Is crushing Solo Articuno at 75%. Does well against Arceus Crobat at 58%. Gets destroyed by Lucario Rampardos. You say that? We've been saying that a lot. I mean, it's definitely... Lucario Rampardos is definitely a very good deck right now. I think in the finals of the Ursa Day tournament, it was 2 Lucario Rampardos. We are favored into Pachirisu at 54%, which is surprising, despite the type advantage. Losing into Darkrai Greninja at 28%, that's abysmal. Losing even worse to Magnezone Skarmory at 16%, and losing even worse than that to Solo Palkia. That's very interesting that Solo Palkia is beating Palkia Vaporeon. That must mean that just adding the more Mons is adding more inconsistency to the deck, and you can't support the Palkias as well because your supporter package just isn't as large. It's very interesting. I'd like to mention that Solo Palkia also has 6.34% win rate over Palkia Vaporeon, which is interesting. Okay, here's the one that I'm really interested to go over. So Lucario Rampardos is crushing Dialga Arceus. So it's the only deck that's really given a beating to the deck with the highest win rate right now at almost 60%. It also is winning against Darkrai Magnezone at 51%. So if you want a deck that's favored against the 2 most popular decks, this is the one to play. Losing into Executor at 41.67%, but slightly favored against Leafeon Celebi, so that would be another argument to run Executor over Celebi. Very favored into Charizard at 89.66%. Just about even into Solo Articuno at 48.48%. Very favored into Arceus Crobat at 58%, almost 59%. Extremely favored into Vaporeon Palkia at 75%. Very favored into Pachirisu at 71%. Has no wins against Greninja Darkrai, but again, that's a data issue, but it's still probably very bad for Lucario Rampardos. But again, Greninja Darkrai is only 1.74% of the meta, so doesn't really seem to be a reason to not play the deck. Very winning into Magnezone Skarmory 57%, and loses badly to Solo Palkia. Yeah, very, very interesting. It's basically a very good deck that is winning against all of the very popular decks. So I can definitely see why there were 2 in the finals at the Ursa Day tournament. All right, moving on to Pachirisu. Pachirisu is getting obliterated by Dialga Arceus at 32%. Very, very slightly favored into Darkrai Magnezone at 50.91%. Loses terribly into both Grass decks at 22 and 30%. Slightly favored into Charizard at 55%. Crushes Articuno at 75%. Very unfavored into Arceus Crobat at 40%. Even more unfavored against Palkia Vaporeon at 36%. Even more unfavored than that into Rampardos Lucario at 28%. Very favored into Darkrai Greninja at 61%. More favored than that into Skarmory Magnezone at 66%. And another even matchup into Palkia. And now we're going to move on to Darkrai Greninja. This was a very good deck last format, and now it's... If you take a look here, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 dark green squares, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 dark red squares, and then we've got 2 dark orange squares and 1 light green square. So it's like basically you're 50-50 if you're going to win or lose any of these matchups really, really easily or really, really badly. And it's losing the matchups to the way more popular thing. So you're way more likely to run into one of your losing matchups than not. So probably should not play this deck this format. So it's 40% into Dialga Arceus, 66% into Darkrai Zone, loses 28 and 33 into Executor and Leafeon, wins at 57 in Izard, loses 27 into Articuno, wins 75, 71, and 100 into Arceus Crobat, Palkia Vaporeon, and Lucario Rampardos. Loses very badly to Pachirisu at 38, and then also loses very badly to Magnezone Skarmory at 33, and very badly into Solo Palkia at 25. So it's just up and down. It really just depends on what you verse. And the things you have a bad matchup against have a way higher meta share than the things it has a good matchup against. So Darkrai Skarmory, very losing at 31% into Dialga Arceus, 32% into Darkrai Magnezone, 56% into Executor Celebi, 38% into Leafeon Celebi. So this one would be an argument to run the Leafeon version, although this is way further down on the meta share list. 61% favored into Charizard, 44% unfavored into Articuno. It has won all games so far against Arceus Crobat, but that's obviously going to change. 62.5% favored into Palkia Vaporeon, extremely favored into Lucario Rampardos at 83%. That's the highest rate so far. Very losing into Pachirisu at 33%, very favored into Greninja Darkrai at 66%, and extremely unfavored into Palkia at 28.57%. All right, and the very last deck is the Solo Palkia deck. It is very losing at 38% into Dialga Arceus. It's extremely winning against Darkrai Magnezone at 66%, 76% against Executor Celebi, 76% against Leafeon Celebi, very losing against Zard at 38%, extremely losing against Articuno at 25%, an even matchup that's not really even into Arceus Crobat, very losing into Palkia Vaporeon, extremely winning into Lucario Rampardos, extremely losing into Pachirisu at 25%, extremely winning against Darkrai Greninja, extremely winning against Magnezone Skarmory. So this is another one that's very swingy, but we have 6 dark green squares, 3 dark red squares, and 2 dark orange squares. So it's, but the reason why it's not closer to a lower win rate is because 3 of those dark green squares are on all sides of things that are like all meta share decks that are way higher percentage of the meta. So basically, while it's really volatile, it does way better against the meta decks, the more meta decks than the other meta decks that aren't quite as meta as the other meta decks. Okay. All right, and here we have a pie chart. I just wanted to show you guys what it looks like just visually, the meta share. So this big chunk over here is other. So what's going to happen is over time, this other section is obviously going to diminish and get divvied up amongst these other meta decks based on their results, right? Because tournament players want to win tournaments. They're not trying to play tournaments for fun and not win. So the meta decks that are performing better are just going to get larger slices of this pie. So it'll be interesting to see exactly where they go, and then there's going to be new decks that emerge to counter those larger slices of pie, and that's what makes a meta fun, is that it's just this constant evolving thing until things get too solved, and then we're praying for the new cards, right? So 11.7% is Dialga, this dark red here. Darkrai Magnezone, 8.5%. Executor Celebi is at 7.4%. Celebi Leafeon is at 7.4%. Charizard is at 4.3%. Articuno is at 4.3%. Arceus Crobat is at 2.1%. Palkia Vaporeon is at 2.1%. Rampardos Lucario is at 2.1%. Pachirisu is at 1.1%. Darkrai Ninja is at 1.1%. Magnezone Skarmory is at 1.1%. Palkia is also at 1.1%. So lots of low representation for some of these decks that are performing extremely well. So I expect those slices to get significantly larger. But yeah, I just wanted to give you guys this nice little visual representation of the meta. And now we're going to get into the deck lists. All right, so here's the clear winner from this meta report in Triumphant Light, this first one here. Some of them run just the Healing Shaman, some of them just run the Fly mode or Fly form, whatever it is. Some of them run one of each, one Singleton and not the other one. This one's running one Mars. What I do is I just go to Limitless's website and I look up the best results and I click on the one that Limitless is recommending as the best result most of the time. But yeah, Dialga is just doing way too good of a job at beefing up Arceus, having a bunch of HP. Adamant's making him harder to take down. Cape's making it harder to get taken down. Potion is more sustain. Notably, okay, there's one Sabrina, one Cyrus, and I do like the one Mars tech. I think that's actually pretty cool. But yeah, this deck is looks really fun, and I'm going to be playing it on stream tonight. Okay, next deck is Darkrai Magnezone. Big yawn. Instead of running Drud, they're now running Kangaskhan because Kangaskhan can pressure other Druds and also just provide more pressure instead of just sitting there, and they're not so weak to bench attackers, which makes a lot of sense. Again, we see the 1 Cyrus, 1 Sabrina split. We've got the 2 Leaf in case we started off with the Darkrai in the active spot, which makes sense. We've got a helmet and a cape. We've got the research and the Pokeballs for consistency. Notably, no communication in this list, but I'm not sure if they're running it this format or not. All right, here we go. Everyone's favorite. We've got Egg Celebi. This is my favorite deck in Mythical Island because I ran it with Superior. Got a lot of tournament tops. But again, we're seeing a split of Sabrina Cyrus. This time we've got 2 Sabrina because we have so much space. We've got 2 helmets, 1 cape, 2 potion, 2 Erica, a bunch of heal, 1 calm, which I really, really like because this deck sucks very badly if you don't find Executor. So even though there's a low Pokemon count, you don't have that many Pokemon to trade in. That just means you have a higher chance of drawing the Executor that you need. And then we have the Pokeballs research for consistency, of course. Now we have the Leafeon version. So essentially, Leafeon is doing almost the exact same thing as Executor, and as we saw in the matchup spread, these decks are very, very similar. Again, a 1 Sabrina, 1 Cyrus split, another calm, because again, if they don't draw Leafeon, they have the same issue. Cape, Potions, Ericas, it's almost the exact same deck. All right, now we have Zard. Zard's performing less good this format so far, but I still really like it with the 2 communications. Really helps boost the consistency. I personally like to run 1 Leaf and 2 X speed to make sure I can get that Moltres in the active spot if I'm going second. I do run the 1 Dawn myself. I think 2 is a little clunky sometimes. No Cyrus Sabrina, but this is like the only deck that would make sense in because Charizard's one-shotting everything, so you don't need to split them. You just need to yoink things in the back, slow them down, sneak the kill, because Charizard can basically knock out anything in the game, barring a few exceptions. This is the new solo Articuno deck. This deck just will not go away. We've got blue, potions, and cape to survive, along with the newest addition is Irida, which is why I think these decks are doing so much better now. We have the Misty Cheese, of course. We've got a 2-2 of Cyrus and Sabrina, so your Pokemon are never safe. We have the 1 Pokeball, which opens up even more space because you're only running 2 Pokemon. And then we have the Geo, Pokeballs, Research, Rocky Helmets. Seems very solid. All right, next up we have the Arceus Crobat deck. I think this deck's like super boring, very uninteresting. Personally, 1 Dawn, 1 Leaf, 1 Cyrus. So again, in tournament play, this split is just super common. 1 Leaf. I really don't get what you're supposed to do if you... Is that... Oh, okay. It's because if you have Arceus, you can get the Heatran out of the active spot. But starting with the Arceus with 1 Leaf is a real bummer. Pokeballs research for consistency. Seems pretty straightforward. This is the Palkia Vaporeon Manaphy deck. We're not seeing a split of Sabrina and Cyrus, just the 1 Cyrus, 1 Irida, Research Ball, 2 Capes, 2 Leafeon, which makes a lot of sense because you're running 3 Pokemon that have double retreat. Excuse me, 5, because Vaporeon is in there as well. Makes perfect sense. Next, we have one of the absolute best decks of the format, Rampardos Lucario. I like the 1 Marshadow because I hate starting with it. I like the 1 Sudowoodo, and then you just run all the other Pokemon that are necessary, the Lucario, the Rampardos, and the Cranidos. We have the 2 Research. Again, we have the Sabrina Cyrus split. We have the Fossils, 2 Communication, so we can find our Rampardos and our Lucario, and 2 Pokeball. I like this list very much. All right, next we have Solo 18 Trainer Pachirisu. So whenever we see, I mean, this is almost the same exact deck as the Articuno list, just there's no Irida. We have a Mars here. We have a blue, 2 Potions. Red card's really strange. They're really trying to mess with the opponent's hand, make them stumble. You know, kind of going for like, you know, like how a red deck wins in Magic is just trying to hope that like you stumble on lands or something and then punish you for it. That's kind of the vibe I'm getting here. I like it. All right, next we have Greninja Darkrai Drud. Really no reason to play this deck. Ooh, the 1 Tauros is disgusting. Really don't like that. 2 Research, 2 Leaf, 2 Cyrus, 2 Pokeball, 1 Communication. I like everything except the Tauros in here. Okay, so now we are running Magnezone Skarmory. The 1 Heatran, you might be wondering what the Heatran's for. It's a mana sink, essentially. So Skarmory only requires 1 energy. Magnezone produces its own. or Magneton, whatever. And the Heatran is just some place to put your other energies. Now, starting with Heatran is basically a death sentence, but you're just hoping that doesn't happen to you. I personally don't think it's worth it because, 1 out of 5 games you're going to start with Heatran on average, and that just seems terrible to me. I would take that out. And then this is the Solo Palkia deck. It is the exact same. Is it the exact same as the Solo Articuno? If not, it's like 1 or 2 cards different. But you got the Geo, the Misty, the Irida, Sabrina, the Cyrus, the Potion, the Cape, you know, the helmet. This is just, you know, apparently a really good supporter package if you're only going to run 2 Pokemon. And yeah, that looks like that is it. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Again, please like or comment, subscribe. Ideally, that would be great. And hopefully this was helpful, help you figure out what decks to work towards, maybe what you could expect to see if you plan on participating in a tournament. And with that said, I appreciate it, and I will see you guys soon.